Hello, YouTube. So today we're going to do a quick read through of the DIA's FOIA electronic reading room. This is basically where they release all of their different FOIA requests, or they actually can do this kind of on their own fruition. Every year they have a new process to release information that they think should be. And so this is, again, AATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. That's what we're going to be focusing in on today. And this is to give a little breakdown of where I get a lot of my information. Just one of the many places that I go to. And as you can see here are all the categories from Venezuela to Russia to North Korea, Mexico, Iraq, Iran, Congress, China. We have a bunch of different categories here. But as the universe would have it, the first link is AATIP, or the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And you see a lot of these are DIRDs, what people call these Defense Intelligence Reference Documents, or DIRDs. And a lot of these have some really interesting names. We have the Advanced Nuclear Propulsion for Manned Deep Space Travel, Advanced Space Propulsion based on Vacuum Space-Time Metric Engineering, Programmable Matter, an introduction to the statistical Drake equation, which is basically the equation that said, if there are aliens, where are they? Aneutronic fusion propulsion. We have human biological effects, or field effects on human biological tissues. This is the one that made a lot of headlines. They got a lot of their information from MUFON, or a lot of people had problems that a lot of the information came from the National Enquirer. But that is an interesting one. They actually talk about, unexplained pregnancies and a lot of these other things like apparent time being missing, that kind of stuff. Anti-gravity for aerospace applications. This is a lot of people. This has to do with the why is the name escaping me at the moment? The Bob Lazar story, where Area S4 around Area 51. And they're looking into anti-gravity research and propulsion, biosensors and biomems, cockpits in the era of breakthrough flight, cognitive limits on the simultaneous control of multiple unmanned spacecraft, concepts for extracting energy from the quantum vacuum. This has to do with the Planck energy, or as again Salvatore Pais talks about, the super force or the Planck force. Basically down at the Planck scale, kind of the smallest voxel of the universe, or volumetric pixel. Just as the screen has pixels in the two-dimensional spectrum, you can have three-dimensional pixels where it has a volume, and the smallest volume is the Planck, the Planck scale. So extracting energy from the quantum vacuum, or quantum vacuum fluctuations, or detection and high resolution tracking of vehicles at hypersonic velocities, high frequency gravitational wave communications. We know about gravitational waves. We actually have a system. Here we have LIGO, or one of our LIGO detection systems. And this stands for Laser or Light Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. And basically these observe low frequency gravitational waves, and that's important and specific. These are low frequency gravitational waves. Usually we see these from two colliding black holes. As you can see here, they make these waves as they're orbiting each other at higher and higher and higher speeds. So once they collide, they make this big rolling gravitational wave that we can sense with these sensors. Typically these are about 2.5 miles long. Here this one is 4 kilometers, but there are many different ones. There's one at Caltech, there's one at I think at Harvard, I believe. I could be wrong there, but there are a few of these. And basically how it works is there's a laser here. The laser goes in, hits this little beam splitter in the middle, and it splits it into two equal beams. 50% of the EM energy goes this way, 50% goes that way. And these are extremely, extremely precise. These are exactly the same length. And it goes down to the edge, it hits this mirror, and it bounces back. And then it gets detected. Now these have to be so precise because the laser must, on each side, go down, bounce off, and come back and hit the sensor at the exact same time. Oops, sorry about that. At the exact same time. So when we sense one of these gravitational waves being generated, we can see the stretching and crunching of space, and the stretching and crunching of space on each of these, changing virtually the speed of light, changing the length of time that it takes for the laser to go down, hit the mirror, and come back. And based on the stretching and crunching of each of these arms, we can identify the location of where these gravitational waves are coming from and how intense the event was that created these gravitational waves. Now, this is important because these do not detect high frequency gravitational waves. And that is important for UAPs and what we're talking about here, because we could be swimming in a bath of high frequency gravitational waves and be none the wiser, just as we're swimming in a high frequency RF energy all the time. We're coming from all of our devices being generated from satellites and radios and all sorts of electronics around us. Even the wires in our walls have electric fields around them that really transmit the energy. But nonetheless, these are all things that we interact with, or rather don't interact with in any meaningful way, but nonetheless, they are all around us. So this is LIGO, an example of something that can detect these low frequency waves. See here, they're talking about high frequency gravitational waves, and we'll get into each and every one of these, not each and every one, we'll break these down a little more in depth as we go along through this. But let's skip down here. We have warp drive, dark energy, and the manipulation of extra dimensions. This to me is the most interesting, but let's start at the top here. So first we have a letter, or rather a memorandum for the Deputy Secretary of Defense, subject being Senator Harry Reid's request to put the advanced AATIP under special access protection, to which he was denied. We later found out down here. They're earmarked, this is in July of 2008, $10 million. He co-sponsored this with Representative Inoue from Hawaii. Supplemental to fund the DIA's effort to look into potential future aerospace weapons threats. A $12 million earmark has been allocated to support the program to the fiscal year of 2010. So this was given to Bob Bigelow, who was interestingly the only individual to actually apply for this. Maybe he was the only one equipped, maybe he had advanced knowledge. But here it says, quote, the AATIP that Senator Reid refers to is officially AAWSAP. It says right here, the Advanced Aerospace AAITP, which is not AATIP necessarily, but the AAITP, that Senator Reid refers to is officially the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program, AAWSAP, contract managed by the Defense Intelligence Agency. Its primary purpose is to investigate revolutionary advances in future aerospace technologies with emphasis on research for unconventional and revolutionary technologies. Again, the sole bid was to Bigelow Aerospace in Las Vegas, yada, 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 yada. But basically, they were tasked with writing these DIRDs, or these DIRD reports. Going over one, we have another letter written to Secretary Lynn. And this is the interesting part that I outlined. Since the AATIP program and the study were first commissioned, much progress has been made with the identification of several highly sensitive, unconventional aerospace-related findings. So right here, it just says it in black and white. Since the beginning of this program, there has been much progress with the identification of several highly sensitive, unconventional aerospace-related findings. Given the current rate of success, the continued study of these subjects will likely lead to technology advancements that in the immediate near term will require extraordinary protection. Due to the sensitivities of the information surrounding aspects of this program, I require your assistance in establishing a restricted special access program with a bigoted access list for specific portions of the AATIP. Now it goes on to say some a little bit more interesting things that we don't have to get into now, but I think anybody who wants to look into the stuff, wants to dig in, should definitely do so, because the information is there if you're willing to look for it. Here we have another document which is titled another DIRD report on advanced nuclear propulsion for manned deep space missions. And I highlighted one section here that I thought was interesting. They're talking about helium-3 and how it's abundant in the atmosphere of Jupiter, and they can mine it from the atmosphere of Jupiter. Also saying studies have been conducted on spacecraft propulsion with the matter-antimatter annihilation reaction. However, it is erroneous technical challenge to produce antimatter in appreciable quantities. The idea of using nanogram amounts of antimatter for the ignition of fission, fusion, microexplosions appears to have credible potential, but even their production and storage of nanogram quantities of antimatter pose serious technical problems. So I'm going to extrapolate here a bit. This is just my opinion. The antimatter thing probably isn't where the big story is at, but that's just my personal opinion there. Another DIRD report. It's important. This is saying it's kind of extrapolating out to 2050, the 2050 time frame, but these are not extrapolations of current technology. And remember, this is a unclassified report, but it talks about lift, propulsion, control, power generation, spatial and temporal translation, signature reduction, optical, infrared, radio frequency or RF, acoustic, materials, configuration, structure, armament, and my two favorite, human interface and human effects. Well, not necessarily my favorite, maybe my least favorite, but what I think are the most interesting. Human interface and human effects. Now it goes on to detail a lot of the specifics around this report, what went into this report, the different methodologies that they use to kind of get the information that they think they have. And you can go through this yourself and kind of read through these and see what you might find interesting, what things may not be as interesting. And this is slide 9. A lot of people may remember this infamous slide 9. They talk about psychotronic weapons, cognitive human interface, penetration of solid surfaces, instantaneous sensor disassembly, alteration, manipulation of biological organisms, anomalies in the space-time construct, unique cognitive human interface experiences. Now this is interesting. If you have the ability to interface with the human brain, depending on how advanced that technology would be, there would theoretically be limitless possibilities on what experiences you could beam into someone's brain, hypothetically speaking. DoD advantages. The DoD has been involved in similar experiments in the past, and if you can say that they've been involved in experiments in the past and they consider these advantages, they probably did those things in the present and will continue to in the future. DoD has relationships with renowned subject matter experts. Why continue these relationships if these were all in the past? The DoD controls several facilities where activities have been detected. So the DoD is controlling facilities where they've detected these psychotronic weapons, cognitive human interfaces, yada, 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 what have you. And I find these extremely interesting. Moving on. Here, let's see if I can find where things get really interesting. It's a lot of mumbo jumbo you may not be able to understand, but if you do, you're smarter than me. But let's see. Ooh, merry-go-round. That's funny. but I'm trying to find this very important. Here we go. Manifestation of negative masses. Now, when it comes to this phenomenon, I believe this is extremely important. I think when it comes to negative masses, maybe that's really where all of this is headed. Not necessarily anti-gravity systems, but I think this is really interesting. When you look at the Great Pyramids and how they moved those giant stones, when you look at the experiments that the Germans were doing around World War II, a lot of it seemed to be around reducing mass. And we would see these airships people would talk about, where these airships would have propellers on them. Or if you could have, gravity propulsion, why would you need a propeller? Some of these are moving really slow, etc., etc. But maybe what we're seeing is reducing the mass of an object. And when you reduce the mass, you reduce the effect that gravitons or the Higgs boson would have on it. It's a interaction with the gravitational field. Maybe just by reducing the mass, you're reducing the amount of gravity acting on a thing. And if you can make something have a negative mass, then maybe you can have, in theory, anti-gravity. But I think mass reduction is really where all of this is really going. But let's see what they're saying here. There's no fundamental physical principle standing in the way which forbids the existence of negative masses. If this is true, the question is, where are these negative masses? The recent noticed large bubbles or voids observed in intergalactic space could possibly be explained by the repulsive force of negative masses assumed to occupy the voids. But alternative, less exotic explanations have been offered as well. However, there are at least one fundamental phenomenon which strongly speaks for the existence of negative masses. It is the spin of fermions, like the spin of electrons. Fermions are described by Dirac's relativistic wave equation. The equation has both positive and negative energy components, and because of the mass-energy relation, it therefore must have negative mass components. According to Schrodinger, sorry, I get that wrong. It is these negative mass components which leads to the phenomenon of the spin. Since the overall mass of the electron is positive, the occurrence of negative masses in the Dirac equation must mean that the electron is a mass pole, which is superimposed in mass dipole. Now, this is a lot of lingo, a lot of words, basically to say there's nothing in our current science, not even needing to create a whole new physics, there's nothing in our current science breaking the ability to reduce mass or have negative mass. Maybe all this dark energy that we're seeing is just negative mass, objects with negative mass. Maybe these large bubbles or voids observed in intergalactic space could possibly be explained by repulsive forces or negative mass. And maybe this could be what we're really meaning by anti-gravity, not necessarily reducing or reverse gravity, but just your mass is gone. You can take your mass and maybe move it into the future or move it into the past. But these are a lot of interesting things that I don't know a lot about. I couldn't read that for you even if I wanted to. Ooh. But these have some really interesting documents here. I want to go to this one. Warp drive, dark energy, and the manipulation of extra dimensions. Now, when we think of dimensions, there's the 2D line, or the one-dimensional line, There's the two-dimensional object or shape that could be this rectangle. 3 dimensions, where if I could reach out to my screen, touch this rectangle, and pull it outwards. And then there are higher dimensions, theoretically. And a lot of people don't talk about the implications of higher dimensions. Let's say there were people who lived on this page. technically this B and this 6, from all the other aspects in its universe, it is completely closed off. It is in a locked room, like a safe room, for instance. If you had access to the third dimension and you were, let's say, this B and this 3, you could just hop out the screen and plop back in B6, and they'll be, how did you get in here? It's completely boxed off. How did you find your way inside of this closed room? How can you see inside this window if you're existing in the 2-dimensional plane? But us 3-dimensional creatures, is pretty simple to take something here, copy it, paste it there, or pick it up, move it there, what have you. So let's say you have access to the 4th spatial dimension. Well, that would mean that no room that you lock yourself in could keep you safe. Someone could theoretically just kind of not necessarily walk through the wall, but they could walk around the wall in the 4th dimension. But this is kind of the ability that these reports seem to hint that some beings or some, classified programs have access to. The manipulation of extra spatial dimensions. And another thing, when you keep going up in spatial dimensions, it's not as if you just have more access to more space. It also affects time in a way. So when you go up to the 4th spatial dimension, you can see around all 3-dimensional objects. So, just as in 2D world, if something's here, the if you will, couldn't see through the cashmere to see the effect. But us in 3D world, we can see the cashmere effect all at once. If you were in a 4D perspective, you can see around all 3-dimensional objects all at once. And it's weird to try to imagine that in your brain, where if you hold up a sheet of paper in front of you, it blocks out the world behind it. But in this perspective, no 3-dimensional object could block another 3-dimensional object behind it. And that's interesting. When you keep going up, it kind of changes your perspective even more. You move up another layer into the 5th spatial dimension, and you can start to see the relative timelines. People call it Metatron's cube or the hypercube or different things like that. People seem to explain experiencing this hypercube during psychedelic experiences, or at least that is what we hear in reports. And it's interesting when you dig deeper and deeper into the connections that we may be finally coming up to, and all these weird kind of woo type of places. And we're seeing maybe a lot of the stuff has been seeded into our media over the years. Maybe you have access to this higher spatial dimension. You can see the future and the past simultaneously. Maybe you can see all potential outcomes simultaneously. And maybe you can see the perspective of which we could only consider God-like. Not saying that you would become a god when you enter the 6th spatial dimension. But what I am saying is these abilities that these extreme advanced physics gives us access to, or gives classified programs and other beings access to, will give them, they say magic, any advanced science is indistinguishable from magic. So maybe we're seeing this advanced science distinguishing itself with magic. But that's just my thoughts here. We could go into cockpits in the era of breakthrough flight. There's not a lot here. Again, these are all unclassified, so not a lot of these get into anything particularly interesting. Pitch and yaw and all these good things. This is interesting. But all things that are in this public report that anybody can look at. Not to say that I have any information none of you guys have. I definitely don't. All of the information that I have obtained has been through unclassified means. But there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. You can just read through and skim through and look at the pictures, if you will, or you can stop and read through all of this interesting stuff. The main difference between navigating with existing vehicles and breakthrough vehicles is that the breakthrough vehicles will have to navigate in deep space and around other astronomical bodies where GPS systems and location beacons do not exist. Another major difference is that the physics of the propulsion methods might distort or block information that is traditionally used for navigation. Interesting. In inertial guidance systems, accelerometers and ring laser gyros accurately track the changes in the vehicle's motion, laterally and rotational accelerations. These signals are integrated to keep track of position and evaluating changes in both velocity and acceleration. In these cases of the double hull, where the inertial effects might be different inside the craft, these tools become more difficult to apply. If we assume that the physics and technology for manipulating inertial fields or for warping space-time can accurately track these effects, then that knowledge may compensate to keep these tools viable. Design of future guiding systems must address this issue. What they're basically saying here is that normal tracking systems like GPS that lets us know where we are relative to other things in our surroundings wouldn't work. We may have to use extremely advanced ways to track where we are in the universe, having to navigate around stars and around debris and asteroids and things like that. And then the propulsion system itself may limit our ability to perceive these signals that we could otherwise receive, or SIGINT, signals intelligence, that being RF frequencies that are around us, infrared light, being not infrared light, but electromagnetic radiation. So being able to see, well, yes, it would be infrared light, because as you're moving in this, space-time bubble, you're shifting the light coming at you. So things with the perspective of the environment around you would appear different, especially depending on the speeds at which you're moving. And it gets really, 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 really weird and interesting when you start moving at these high speeds. Space and time work a little different. But 6 degrees of independent motion and orientation, obviously good stuff. 3 flight regimens. Near the surface of gravitating body, where gravitational direction provides natural orientation, orbits around the gravitational body, where cues for entering orbit are required for the pilot, deep space flight, without obvious orientation cues or obvious sense of motion. Navigational information sources, position, velocity, star tracker. Now this is interesting. Being able to track quasars specifically may be a good way to navigate around the universe, but a star tracker or having a star map would be really interesting as well. But then again, that always has to do with perspective. So if we were to create a map of the universe, usually we would start at Earth because we're from Earth, and from the perspective of Earth, we'd make that relative map from there. Velocity, accelerations, linear, rotational. These are all really, really interesting reports that you can dig into and look at yourself, and also into the foundation and the forming of AATIP, what happened around AATIP. But keep in mind here, AATIP and AAWSAP may not be as different as we were led to initially believe. But this is all really interesting stuff. I hope that helped a little bit. And I ended the recording and forgot to hit this one. The anomalous acute and subacute field effects on human biological tissue. Now, mainly what this report talks about are the propulsion systems of hypothetical craft, and how they may interact with human biological tissue. Now, a lot of this was written by Kit Green, or Christopher Green, who actually said he was the go-to person in the DIA to talk about morbidity and mortality when it came to UAPs or UFOs. But there are a lot of effects. Among the most important pathophysiological effects are heating and burn injuries, ionizing and non-ionizing, thermally induced, neurological effects on the brain, cognitive, central nervous system, neuromuscular, central and automatic nervous system, neurocognitive, yada, 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 yada. Basically, it's talking about all of the both neurological effects and the dermal effects on the skin. I'm just going to give my opinion here. My belief and my opinion is that many of these effects are coming from the propulsion systems that create a field effect, and then these are being experienced by people. Let me see if I can find where it get hours. Headache, temporal effects lasting 3 weeks, dizziness, vertigo, cardiac palpitations at 48 and 72 hours, malaise, low-grade fevers, kind of the normal stuff. But it gets interesting. I'm trying to see if I can find this good stuff. And this came from MUFON in 1996. They're talking about a lot of the human-related physiological effects from the propulsion systems of these crafts. And it goes in order of frequency, from highest frequency to lowest. And to start here, the lowest frequency of events that we are getting from MUFON, and maybe this has to do with people's willingness to report something. If they report something and they had an induced feeling of calm and serenity, they may not be willing to report that. It was a cool experience. They are like, no one needs to know about that. It was fun. If they have a loss of hearing, a loss of taste, itching, stunned, a perceived teleportation, things like this, you may be less likely to report to people. Claimed implant, genealogical problems, urination problems, breathing problems, weight loss, ringing in ears, taste, nosebleeds, claimed ESP development, nightmares, hair loss, diarrhea, death, healing, weightlessness, levitation, dizziness, sexual encounters, dehydration, perceived time suspension, insomnia, appetite loss, voice loss, significant odors, numbness, apparent experience of telepathy. Interesting, they add apparent experience, amnesia, weakness, fatigue. But the big one here, apparent abductions. At the most frequent, at 129. Now, maybe there was a bias in looking for these apparent abduction cases. Maybe people who were abducted felt that they needed to report that the most. Or maybe people were experiencing that the most. I think there's a mixture of all of those in there, probably. Or maybe a lot of these people had this experience along with a bunch of these other experiences that were tallied up as well. But burns, unconsciousness, marks left on body, light beam effects, perceived time loss. It's interesting. There are eye injuries, heat, medical exam, yada, yada, yada. Ground traces. This is interesting. They saw traces of the craft left on the ground. These are all field effects that people were having in their bodies. And this is from South Africa, Australia, Italy, France, Brazil, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Virginia, New Mexico, Texas, Ohio, Peru, Maryland, Brazil, Oregon, Sweden, Australia. All of these seem to be, let's read through the rest of these. England, Illinois, Argentina, Minnesota, Nevada, Another Brazil. Yeah, a lot of these seem to be in areas that are either in or friendly with the West. Yeah, I don't see any from China or Russia, or maybe that has to do with a bias in reporting. Maybe that has to do with a bias in the inputs of reports, what reports they're actually getting. Maybe that has to do with something else. But these are from, a lot of these from 1971, 69, 66, 57. Because I believe this report was between the years of 1873 and 1994. So a relatively wide time span there. But yeah, again, you can read these reports for yourself, see all the data on what they collected here. And a lot of people say, well, this can be thrown away because it was from MUFON. And I get it, but this is the government looking at public sources of information, which I think is important, that were UFO induced. And when you take all of this stuff and you combine it all together, I think you get a clear picture on what could be happening, what might be happening, what people could be experiencing or what people think they could be experiencing, what others may not want them to know that they're experiencing, want them to think they're experiencing something else. There are a lot of options here, not a lot of answers. Hopefully some will come soon. But again, yeah, you can go here to just type in DIA FOIA reading room. It's easy for you, the very first link, and you see all these cool documents. Now, people don't have time for this. I get it. Maybe we'll do a second video going more in depth, but I just thought I'd start recording, just show people where I get my information from, and hope this helps you in your research endeavors. Decentralized research is the way to go, and it is how we win. So yeah, team unity for the win. See you guys next time.